Hello and welcome. Welcome to the first podcast episode of the podcast show called ThePineappleQuest. What's the quest? What's the pineapple? Both? I don't know. But I know for sure that today we're going to have an amazing podcast episode speaking about surnames, but more about that in a bit. The Pineapple Quest is a podcast series that I'm just going to start now this year. And I'm going to see where it goes. And I aim to speak to interesting people about interesting topics, mostly relevant to society. And so it's a journey, and I'm looking forward to you guys joining me on that journey. And the first step in that journey is the podcast today. And today I'm going to be speaking with my lovely guest, Dia, about the super interesting topic of surnames. And I mean, surnames are super important. You know, we hear them in songs like, say my name, say my name. And we use them when we fill in documents and everything else. So, it's going to be one hell of a episode. I'm looking forward to it. And Dia and I, we went to uni together, but I don't want to steal the introduction from her. Dia, welcome. Lovely having you here. And let the people know what you want to share with them.
Well, thank you very much, Shani, for having me on your first episode. I'm glad to be here and talking about surnames, which is a topic that I recently wrote my thesis about, so it's fresh in my memory.
Congrats on that. Was it fun? Was it fun writing about it?
I guess it's not an answer you hear often, but I enjoyed it very much. Yeah, I really enjoyed writing and researching my thesis topic because, well, it lies close to my heart. It's an interesting topic. And I think for many people, it might be too.
Oh, definitely. Once I heard about your topic, I was intrigued and I knew we had to do a podcast. So you said it lies close to your heart. How did this whole idea come about? Why write about surnames? What happened? Or not what happened, but how did that idea come into being?
So as you know, I recently got engaged.
Congrats.
To, my lovely fiance, Alan. He's also here for
moral
support. And, it got me thinking. So people get married and they take on their husband's surname, right? And surnames are generally a topic that people just take for granted. They think, you get married as a woman, you take on the man's last name. And, that's just how it is. Why would you question it? Yeah. But as you probably know of me already, I'm quite passionate about, equality, women's rights. And I was thinking to myself, why is it that I would have to give up my surname, a part of my identity, just because I got married? And it doesn't change anything about the fact that I love Alan a lot, with my whole heart, in fact. It's just, I don't think it's fair. I think it's something that is often overlooked and, we should look into it more closely.
Oh, definitely. Let's have a look. So you realize, okay, in many cases, people, or let's say women, accept the surnames of their husbands or their fiancés. So what is exactly the state of affairs? What is, let's say, the situation when it comes to the practice of surnaming and giving out surnames?
So in most of Western Europe, the Western world, women do take on their husband's surnames a lot. Although there's some changes, for example, I'm Kurdish myself, and in my culture, women don't take on their husband's surnames.
Not at all.
No, not at all. It's not practiced. Okay. And it's also not practiced in China, South Korea.
Okay.
So they keep their own surnames.
Okay.
But the fact is that all over the world, what is practiced quite globally, it's a universal norm, is that children always get the father's surname. Mm-hmm. There's few exceptions here and there. Someone's like, oh, no, that's not true. I have my mom's surname. But then my first question is, were you born out of wedlock?
Out of what?
Wedlock, out of marriage.
Outside of marriage.
Yes. So there is a law also in the Netherlands that if you are born outside of marriage, then you automatically get your mom's surname.
How do people react when you ask them, "Are you born out of wedlock?" Just like, wow, that went personal real quick.
Yes. So, well, they look at me puzzled, and they're like, "What does that have to do with anything?" Until I explain to them that the law is actually created to protect men, right?
When we say the law in this case, are we speaking about the Dutch law or just like a tendency of many laws globally?
Many laws in the Western world.
Okay.
Yeah, globally.
They have that tendency.
And they have that tendency. And the reason they have that tendency is to protect wealth, right? So a woman can't just say, hey, this is your child. Now you have to take care of my son. And, you know, like we have a right to be taken care of. It really originates from, this whole thing. You always know who the mother is. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, right? You never, not never, but it's more difficult to know who the father is of a child. Yeah. And this law was created to protect men that, you know, like even if they're just married to a woman, but they sleep around, for example, that another woman can't be like, hey, you know, like I have a claim on your wealth because my child is yours, you know? So what I'm trying to say here is that the law is created to protect men in this matter, to ensure that even when it is their child, they don't get the surname, they get the mother's. But it's not because the mother's surname is like, you know,
celebrated
or anything. It's really just there to protect also the patriarchy and wealth, you know?
Okay, yeah, I mean, looking at history, I assume that like the laws you're referring to right now were also like drawn or written by men. I mean,
white.
Yeah, white men as well. No, definitely. So I definitely can see how that came into being. Did you encounter cases where you asked like, okay, were you born out of wedlock? And they said no?
No.
Okay.
I did not.
Not yet. I mean, since I knew we were going to do this podcast, I asked a few people about their surnames, and indeed, in the people I met, most cases, they indeed had the name of their fathers. And so I started a small questionnaire for this podcast, like about this topic, and we roughly asked 100 people. We let them fill out Google Docs, and 75% of the people we asked actually received their father's surname. So, which was just astonishing to me. Like, okay, this is actually significantly a lot. Like it's not 50-50. It's like a clear majority for, let's say, people receiving or inheriting their father's surnames. And what even struck me more is that, like, okay, then you have roughly like something between 10 and 15% of the people we asked received their mother's surname, and the remaining received their a double surname. So like they were mostly of, let's say, probably Spanish descent, that they received both of their parents' surname, which seems super fair. But that the amount of people that only received their mom's surname is like 15%, like of the 100 people we asked, roughly estimated. I'll publish the exact stats afterwards. And so that really struck with me. But in the questionnaire, we added another question, and it was, did you ever question why you received your surname, right? And 55%, roughly speaking, did question it. And like something around 45% never questioned it, why they had the surname they had, which raises for me the question, like, if like almost half of the people never thought about it, is it a problem? And it probably is, but what do you think about it? What did your thesis reveal? You know, what did it show us, or your research on this topic?
Well, you see, the thing is that surnames have been around since, I guess, the 17th century. 17th century, right? Yeah, it's been a while.
I'd be curious to know what was the first surname.
Yeah, me too. I believe it originated from England.
Oh,
so
it
was originally created to pass down wealth.
Okay.
To ensure the passing down of wealth.
Okay,
between families. So
it was always about wealth, eh?
it was always about wealth in a way. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. wealth in many senses and also property in many senses. It's interesting, right? Because, well, when you add women and children to that
equation,
it was to ensure, right, that surnames show who land women and children belong to.
Oh, so it's like, it's not like who gets the property when the man dies, but it's that they are property as well, the man, woman, and the children.
Well, it only gets passed down to a woman if she's the only person in the family left, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise it would only get passed down to men.
Yeah.
The male person that's next in line to inherit.
Yeah. Oh,
right.
Wow.
And other than that, it's to show, right, who belongs to which man's family.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I guess because it's been around for so long that we don't question it. We take it for granted and we assume it's normal. Even to the point where I myself thought, I was thinking about surnames and I thought, you know what? I'm not taking on my husband's surname, but then the one that I'm keeping is my father's. But even if I took my mother's, it's her father's.
So it like you have to take the name of a man. Like, so you're basically
you have no way out. Either way, you take a man's name. So it's either your maternal grandfather, your paternal grandfather, or your husband's grandfather.
Wow.
Paternal.
All right. So that would make it, let's say, a patrilineal system, right?
Yes.
So that the name is inherited by the father. And if you would inherit the name from your mother, and let's say assume even your grandmother, for the situation being that, assuming hypothetically that she was the person who gave on her surname, that would be called matrilineal, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So what is there a difference between patriarchy and patrilineal?
Yes. So, well, patriarchy is of course a whole system, right? But in this exact example of surnames, patrilineal is more about the way it's passed down.
Okay, so the
right?
lineage.
So it's about the lineage.
Okay, okay.
So, see, what I'm also touching upon in my thesis is that even when you don't take on your husband's surname, your surname, the one you got from your father, then it will still be a patriarchal surname. Even if you take your mom's, it's going to be a patriarchal surname, even if it's matrilineal. Because then you get it from your mom.
Yeah, okay, so you get it matrilineally, but it's embedded in a patriarchic
Yes, because eventually it comes from her grandfather or a man before that, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I must say is that when we had this conversation for the first time, or touched on it, when you told me what your thesis was about, I felt caught, because my whole life I was like, oh, I love my surname, and I was like, oh yeah, I would love to pass it on, and just never not never, but rarely did it occur to me to which extent, this assumption of this being normal, receiving is just based on a patrilineal patriarchic system. So I would like to explore with you, let's say, possible harms that it creates, or if it does create any harms. Maybe it's just a name, maybe it's just letters and sounds, who knows. But I'd be super curious to hear, your take on it.
Well, I think the first thing that I think of is identity, right? So your name, you've been carrying it around since your birth. Everyone knows you by that name. So as a woman, when you get married and you lose a part of your identity and it's become so normalized, that's a harm that is overlooked quite a lot, right? You build business contacts. Maybe you've, done research and now nobody knows it's you because you have a completely different last name. For example, right? And I believe that it's a true obstacle to gender equality in any relationship, to be quite frank, right? Because what makes it so that a man should have more claim to a continuous identity throughout his whole lifetime than a woman. And how does it make sense for two people who come together and, create children, for those children to only carry the man's name? It doesn't make any sense to me. Because two people are in that process.
No.
So why is it that only the man's name and identity is seen as being worthy of being passed, to the next generation, and the woman's can just be lost? Because a lot of people I've asked about surnames have told me, yeah, but what about my heritage? And I mean, your heritage is two sides. You've already lost, one side of it, and you never protested or thought about it.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah. In the poetry scene and the jazz scene, they snap, right? When something good has been said. Yeah, amazing. What about heritage? It's in the questionnaire I asked what people would find relevant for let's say to give on, let's say the sample was made between people between 18 and 35, so like it's a very young group of people and probably very we could say open-minded, I guess. And most, like, I gave 5 options and like what they care most about in inheriting, let's say, their name to their children, or giving or receiving the name of their partner. And family lineage and the better sounding name were the top scoring relevant factors to to inherit the name. And then it was followed by tradition, and then only gender dynamics came into the scope. So that is like, by many people, let's say, gender dynamics isn't necessarily, let's say it's not the primary objective in, let's say, choosing which surname to take. Do you think that's all right? Or like, okay, I might be begging the question here, but like,
I think what you mentioned earlier about the questionnaires, and the primary reasons for people thinking or questioning their surnames were lineage, right? Yeah. The better sounding name. Yeah. And then the last one was gender dynamics. And I think what can answer the question mark that we all have now is why gender dynamics, why is that the last on the list? Well, peer pressure.
Peer pressure?
Yes, peer pressure.
Okay.
Because the better sounding name might be also something that you think sounds better because of peer pressure, right? Yeah. Maybe you have a name that is more foreign, or, from, a minority group, and you think, I'm not really fitting in here, or it just doesn't sound very nice to your understanding. And that's why you want to change it. Lineage might also be due to peer pressure, because let's be honest, do you know your great-great-great-grandfather? Has ever in your life anyone asked you about where your last name comes from and who he is?
No. like no and yes. Like, I don't know my great-great-great-great-grandfather. I mean, if my great-great-great-grandfather were to be, I don't know, maybe a famous artist, and then maybe, right, then I would be a story like, oh yeah, by the way, Picasso. But that's something. So I definitely see what you mean there. It's it fades with time. However, people do take pride in their name. They're like, oh, we the Smiths, we always do it like this, or like, oh, the Smiths, I just chose Smith. Please don't be offended. But like, it's like, oh, we've always done it like this, or we have like I don't know, we're very diligent and ambitious in our doings, so to say. So, so for a weird reason, people take pride in it, even though they don't necessarily know the origins.
Well, it makes sense, right, when you think about it, because your last name is your identity. And I think personally, when they say, we the Smiths, to use your example, people are mostly referring to, their siblings' parents, maybe uncles. That's it. Not their great-great-grandparents. So I think that you could do that with any last name, even if it's one that doesn't go back 3 generations or 2 even.
Okay.
Right? So it's not strange for people to take pride in it. I also take pride in my last name, even though I don't agree with, how it came about, how I got it. But it is a part of my identity, and I will carry it for probably the rest of my life.
Lovely. Lovely. Yeah, that's amazing. So there was 2 things you mentioned in your thesis that I found interesting. And one was how you explained why we just see it as normal to inherit the man's last surname. And could you touch on that maybe for a bit? It was, I think, functional something.
Yes. So earlier in the podcast, you told me that, a lot of people, they don't think about it. Maybe it's just a name, right? Well, this is called functional fixedness.
Functional fixedness.
Yes. That's when you are so fixed in the way you think about the use of an object or a thing that you just can't possibly imagine a different way of using it.
Yeah.
So let me give you a very, very simple example, which helped me understand it better. Let's say you're trying to drive a nail through the wall. And, well, your first thought is, okay, I need a hammer. So you drive to the store, you buy the hammer, you come back, problem solved. But this person could just as well have used the brick in his garden.
That makes sense. So
right,
he wasted gas money to get the hammer, or they or she, and to hammer him the nail on the wall.
They were struggling with functional fixedness because he thought the only way to get a nail through the wall is with a hammer.
Yeah.
And it's like putting your creativity in a box.
Okay.
And thinking, okay, the hammer is the only thing that I can use to drive the nail through the wall.
Yeah.
And then your mind is blocked. You don't think of the book, the hardcover book laying on the table, the brick in your garden. Yeah. I don't know, maybe you have a huge butcher knife.
I think that one's okay to only use for cutting. No, but yeah. I definitely see what you mean. So when we talk about surnames, people happen to not see the alternatives because of functional fixedness. Right?
Yeah, so the question I get whenever I start talking about how it's quite unjust, right, that men's names get preferred over women's names. Everyone, sort of like as if it's constructive criticism. You're like, yeah, but then what do we do? Do we have no last names?
Oh, wow.
Then they are dealing with functional fixedness too, because they think you can only have a last name that comes patrilineally, and that's it. Right? They are locked into thinking that there's no other alternative for last names that are based on more equal grounds, amongst the 2 genders, or, well, the several genders. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to touch on the functional fixedness in a bit. But you had a thought experiment in your thesis, or an example that I found super intriguing, so to say. And would you be down to share that for the listeners as well?
Of course. Okay. So imagine living in a world where it is a widely accepted custom that when a person of color marries a person who is white, it is the white person's surname that gets passed down in case they have children. On top of this, well, if a partner were to change their surname upon marriage to that of their spouse, then, well, socially it would be expected, or assumed even, for that partner to be the person of color in the relationship. And let's just say that for the purpose of this thought experiment, this custom is carried out irrespective of gender. So the deciding factor is just, well, your skin color. Additionally, let's say that any divergence from this general practice like the white partner taking the surname of the partner of color, or their children taking the person of color's surname, would be met with great disdain from all angles of their community. And, well, the white partner's whiteness would probably even be brought into question. More importantly, it should be noted that for there to be any divergence to even begin with, the white partner must be the one open to cooperating with the partner of color, because laws and regulations only permit such a grand departure from naming traditions if the white partner officially signs off on it. So I'm using this analogy to show that when you change the dividing factor, which is gender, right? Because women are the ones expected to change their surname. When you change it to, race, race and gender inequalities, then people start understanding how messed up it is because they see it from a different angle. So here I try to just tap into the awareness and the consciousness that finally is growing on issues of race inequality and trying to use this angle to show that, well, surnames, which is an issue of gender inequality, is also actually quite messed up. Because if we were to think of applying this in the real world, let's say that, my example was going to be put to a general vote, right? So from now on, only white people's surnames would get passed down, no matter the gender of the person. Then I would assume that the next day there would be protests out in the streets. And rightly so, right? Because in the same manner that it is, well, unacceptable to discriminate based on one's skin color, it is unacceptable to do so based on gender as well. So that's what I tried to show with this example.
Wow, yeah. When I heard it the first time, and also now again, it just blatantly puts forward what's wrong or what's this. Yeah, it's just uncomfortable. Just like visualizing it, and definitely thanks for sharing. What I found interesting was that it's what you mentioned frequently is the laws and regulations. So I personally am not acquainted at all with marital surname laws, and so yeah, I just quickly want to ask: do you maybe like know something insights about how it's in the Netherlands or like I don't know?
Yes, of course. So what I know from Dutch laws and regulations is that when a couple has a child and they are married, they automatically get the father's surname.
Automatically.
This is just common practice.
Okay.
It just happens automatically. Okay. No interference is needed.
Okay.
It's just assumed.
Yeah.
But in the case that they want the mother's surname to be passed down, and they're a married couple, not unmarried, because then the regulations are different. Yeah. Then the man has to officially sign that he agrees with this. But the woman is never asked to agree or not, because they assume that because they are married, she will automatically be okay with the children taking the father's last name. So, yeah. This is discrimination based on gender alone and nothing else.
How did you find that out? Like, like how do you happen to discover that fact?
So I was researching, of course, a lot how the law works with this regard, and I found that people get their father's last name automatically. So how come certain people answer me with, "But I got my mom's last name."
back to
that example.
What was the word again? Are you born out of?
Wedlock.
Wedlock.
Yeah. So that's when I found out that Dutch law dictates that if you are born and your mother is not married to, well, anyone, right? Doesn't matter if it's a father or not, just anyone, then you get your mother's surname. And that's how a lot of people got their mother's surname.
Yeah, I think I'll have this is my new conversational starter. Like,
were you born out of wedlock?
What's your last name? Were you born out of wedlock? Oh, wow. And then I'll link the podcast.
It's a good conversation starter.
Oh, I can imagine. But now coming back to functional fixedness, basically the example with the hammer and the brick. So what would be the brick in this case? So to say, what would be the alternative, right? So, because I looked at the questionnaire and I asked, would people be up to give up their surname? And 60% said no. So quite a few people want to keep their surname, rightly so. But what do we do with that?
Yeah, of course it makes sense that everyone wants to keep their surname. And I don't doubt that the 60% you just mentioned, a portion of them may be women too.
Of course, yeah.
Right?
We had almost like exactly 50-50 men and women in the sample. So,
well, a survey was done a few years back asking these similar questions, right? And it showed that the majority of women said they want to keep their surname.
Do you by chance know the name of who conducted that?
It was done by Nugent in 2010.
Okay, I'll just link that then.
Yes, it's more than a few years back. We're getting old.
Yeah,
But so it showed that the majority of women wanted to keep their surnames before they got married, but then eventually they didn't when they got married. They did give up part of their identity. Most of it due to peer pressure.
Peer pressure.
Yes.
Peer pressure.
Peer pressure. Partner pressure. In-law pressure. Yes.
Family pressure.
Yes. But going back to the alternative that you were asking about. So what's interesting, I have found, and actually many others have too, because there have been quite a few studies done on this actually, among the LGBTQ plus community, there's a lot of new ways of going about surnames because, well, if you're a man marrying another man, then whose surname do you take or whose do you pass down to the kids, right? Same case for women. So you see that they've actually been able to escape functional fixedness by thinking outside of the box because they were like, well, we have to come up with an alternative because we're not in the box in the first place, right? We're not a man and a woman, so there's no precedent for it. And you see that a lot of them came up with a blend of their surnames. Yeah, they came up with a blend, or they came up with a new name that symbolizes their love. And that's the one they pass down to their children. And that's the one they will share as a family. And I personally believe that is so beautiful because that way your surname really represents your family and the parents you are born to. And that way it's also based on more equal grounds, right? Nobody has to give up their identity. They just take on an additional one.
What I like, I think this is a very creative solution. And I can also see how it's like so far among the most equal solutions I've heard about surnaming. What I would ask myself, just like, given that lineage to so many people is super important, right? How, like, if it's like, if you have Smiths and Walkers and then become Smocker, I don't know, that's like imagining like joining names. How do you then like is there a way of tracing lineage? Or I mean, maybe it becomes irrelevant because we mentioned earlier that you, I don't know, don't know your grandfather or mother.
Well, the truth is, we never, from my experience, I've actually never met anyone who traced their lineage through their last name, because these days last names are becoming so common, right? So many people have the same last name and they've never even met. But of course, blending the surnames is not the only option, you see. what I really want to encourage you to do, and well, everyone else, is to ensure that you escape the box. We never have to stay in the box. We don't have to keep alive the traditional surnaming tradition. We can blend. We can think of a new name that signifies our love or, our commitment to each other. It could be a cultural name to still have that heritage aspect, right? It could be many things. And that's what I think is beautiful about it, because the more people I talk to, and well, you will talk to.
Oh yeah, the more people will listen to this.
The more people will actually come up with different ideas of how we can move forward, And I believe tracing lineage won't be a problem, because we will undoubtedly hear our last name, the one that we were meant to get from our parents somehow.
At some point, definitely.
Yeah.
There's touching on that, like, I think one of my favorite solutions so far is, I think the way the Spanish do it, that they get both names, the last name of the mom and the father. It's just not joined yet together. But, I find that interesting. But the reason I'm saying this right now is that to enable joining or mashing up different surnames, you would need a whole new legal system, right? Because, for example, having two last names from either parent in Germany is illegal, for example, from what I understood. I have to fact check this, but I'm pretty sure that in Germany, it's just not possible. So that would entail, like, for this out-of-the-box solution, to give gender equal names, or just also honor both family paths that came and created life, I guess. You would have to, enable a legal framework that just permits that, so to say.
Absolutely. But I believe that any positive change will require effort. And of course, it will require changes legally, socially, of course. Yeah. But it's worth it, right?
Definitely.
Because imagine we never did that. Imagine we always thought, well, this would require too many legal changes, too much of a bureaucratic hassle. I do not want to think of that world, honestly. So I think that it's worth it, right? In order to achieve gender equality, and just create a better world. It's worth the hassle. It's worth changing the legal framework. But I do want to add, which is probably interesting, probably relatable. Legally, it's now possible for children in the Netherlands to have two surnames from both parents.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. Recent change.
Start from the bottom. Now we're here. Go further.
So that's a positive progress. But I do want to say about double surnames that my criticism still remains, because both surnames are still from men, right? Because it comes from your mom, but it's still passed down from her father, her grandfather, right? So this origin still remains. And in Spanish cultures, they have the two last names. But as soon as they get married and have children, the only ones that get passed down are the paternal last names. So otherwise it would be too many last names, right? You get a kid with 8 last names. You don't want to have that, believe me. That's a bureaucratic nightmare.
Definitely. But so, yeah. I mean, one of the comments in the questionnaire, because I asked for further comments, I'll publish some of them at the end. I mean, when this is posted, mentioned that it was somebody explaining that they would love to give the paternal last name, but only until they're 18. And when they're 18, they have to decide. So let's say taking that person's idea, combining it with, let's say, having the double name of mom and dad, right? And then when they turn 18, they get to choose, okay, am I taking the patrilineal path or the matrilineal path? might be a big source for conflict.
So you get both, and then
in the beginning
choose.
you get both, and then instead of like having to take your father's name, you can choose which one you want to continue to carry. Because for example, in the questionnaire, also some people said that they have their father's name, but it was their moms raising them, so they identify more with their mom's name, so they felt like they would prefer taking on that one. So no, and that was something I was thinking about. That could be an update, an upgrade of the Spanish solution. I hope nobody from Spain takes this the wrong way. One thing I'm still curious to hear. In your thesis, you speak a bit about responsibility and duty for change. Do you want to shortly touch on that just quickly?
Of course.
Or is that too
No worries. Okay, I'll try to condense it a bit. So, earlier you mentioned the questionnaire, right? Why people want to stick to their surname, and I mentioned peer pressure.
Yeah.
So the thing is, a lot of people, a lot of women, in fact, they take on their husband's surname, and their children get the father's surname because of peer pressure. Because even if they want to do some things differently, believe me, like they will hear from their friends that that's crazy, most likely family, in-laws. Well, whoever else is nearby will say, what the hell are you doing, right? So even their partner, most likely. Actually, there has been a study done that shows, by Pilcher, by the way, that shows that a lot of women take their husband's surname and name their children after the father because of the pressure from their husbands. So this shows that husbands, men in general, in-laws, so basically all of society, right? Everyone in your community is somehow related to the process of you surnaming your children and taking or not taking your husband's surname. And I believe that this connection to the peer pressure that's eventually exercised on women is what makes all of us responsible. All of us have a responsibility to challenge and change this structure, right? And I guess men to a bigger degree than women, right? Because like I mentioned in the example earlier, unless men are the ones willing to cooperate with their partners, right? Their female partners, there will not be any changes because it's their signature that's required by law, not the woman's.
In the Dutch law, probably, right?
Most of Western law.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
I need to like, have some homework to do.
Yeah.
That is.
But so that's why I believe that men in general have a higher degree of responsibility for changing this because they have a privilege, obviously. They are privileged without even having to do anything for it in terms of surnames and actually many other things too, which is why they should do something about it.
Fellas, you heard this? That's lovely. It's interesting. In the questionnaire, I also read a few responses, mainly by men, where it was like, where the arbitrariness of the privilege was acknowledged. So like, I would love to hand on my surname, even though I know there's no moral, framework that actually supports this being the right decision, or like primarily only the only right decision. That's amazing. Looking into the paper book of questions I have brought, I wanted to ask, do you have any insights on, let's say, maybe different cultures, how the surnaming is practiced in different cultures?
Yes. So earlier we mentioned Spanish and Latin American cultures, right? Where both surnames get passed down. But But of course, eventually when the child gets married, she only, or he only carries 2. And the 2 last names that child carries is going to be the paternal ones from both sides of the family. And not the paternal ones. It's just one last name that they carry. And the other one is the husband's last name that they take on upon marriage. Well, the man just keeps their 2 last names from the parents. So that's the Spanish custom. I'm Kurdish, and as I told you earlier, we don't take on our husband's surnames. We just keep our own surname. In South Korea and China, this is also practiced. But the thing is that I do want to say it's not because it's based on gender equality at all, right? Because especially in the case of South Korea and China, I found that even in their genealogical records, women were always omitted from them, you know, daughters, wives, sisters, and they were always seen as still part of the father's line. So they never got the husband's surname because they were kind of branded as outsiders to the husband's lineage. So it's not because they were like, you know, you have equal claims to surname, to keeping your surname as a man, but it was, you're an outsider. You're never going to be a part of the family, so you keep your own last name.
So they kept their own last name and the children received the father's?
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So if the father dies and people want to see whose property it is,
it goes to the children, not to the woman.
Okay. Oh wow, that's intense. Wow. So I think we've covered quite a bit actually. We've spoken about the alternatives. We've spoken about functional fixedness. We've spoken about how it's about wealth as well. We've pointed out how it's super patrilineal and is very dominant. That, let's say, mostly men, or like the surnames of men are being passed down. We've touched on peer pressure. I have a small quote of the questionnaire I'd love to read for the end of this show, so to say. But before I go to that, I'd be super curious to hear, do you have any either message for the listener or maybe another thing? I mean, you've spent 3 months on this topic, you know, maybe there's something where like, this is an insight I want to share, or something you want to get out there.
Yes, there is actually, in fact. Not that I prepared anything, but I just off the top of my head. Well, for those of you listening and were thinking of their surname as part of their lineage and identity, I want to say that your identity is what you create. It's the life you live, how you interact with others, and who you are. You are defined by that and not by a name passed down from a long male ancestor somewhere in history. I believe this is very important for everyone to know, first of all, and also to think of naming your children if you want to have any, if you have any, one day down the road, maybe.
Maybe, who knows?
Based on more egalitarian grounds, right? Talk to your partner, talk to... well, actually, your partner is the only one you should talk to.
Talk to your partner, and your partner.
Basically. Because, well, it should be a joint decision. And I think that men and both women should be open to talking about alternatives. Yeah. So think outside the box. I know this is cliche, but you should not be fixed into thinking that just because something like a surname has been done in a certain way for such a long time, we should continue this practice. Because, well, if we're not here to break the chain, then what are we here for?
Oh, wow. That's touching on the meaning of life. That's a whole... Yeah, I fully agree, though. No, that's lovely. Also, what I also learned throughout this process of preparing this podcast was that I thought that if I accept the name of my future wife, I'll have to give up my own. And I just figured out half an hour ago or like an hour ago that you don't. so yeah, that was for me. I was like, oh wow, it was a very enlightening moment. So yeah, I mean, I can't add any wisdom to what you just said. That was amazing. Funnily enough, the comment I wanted to read has a mini overlap with what you just said, but I found it's a beautiful, wholesome comment. I understand the need of passing traditions, habits of the reign or something like this to your children or something, but good habits or beliefs are a much nicer way of passing family things through. Of course, it sounds nice to say we insert surname like Smiths always done it this way. Or so, but why don't just have fun with it and take the name you like most and inherit the beliefs and habits? And yeah,
I love that.
That was like when I read, I was like, this person got it.
Like, they absolutely do.
I was like, I don't know, like they should open the podcast as well. Amazing, lovely. All right, Dia, it's been lovely.
It absolutely has been.
Yeah, thanks for the insights and also making me think about surnames and now making a few listeners think about surnames as well. Yeah. And yeah, let's hope it's a small changing moment, right? Making surnames a bit more egalitarian. So.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this.
I mean, it's the first time. You can join another time soon.
I would love to.
Amazing. All right.
Wonderful.
Wonderful.